a family wanted the same attention as the McCann family. This case took place in a working class area known as Dewsbury Moor in Dewsbury, West Yorkshire, and the area had seen a lot of better days, and like a lot of towns in the UK, it had a lot of local industries, a lot of unemployment, and crime was rife, but the people who lived there just wanted to get by, and they're a tight-knit community. On the 19th of February 2008, the police received a strange phone call from a woman claiming that her daughter had failed to return home from school, and Karen Matthews was on the phone telling the operator that her 9-year-old daughter was missing. And her voice sounded strange, but there was nothing to it, almost like she was putting it on a bit. Anyway, the police took the matter very seriously because she was a child. And to their credit, they were literally at the scene within minutes. And everything moved so quickly from then on. The reporters were camped outside where she lived with her younger boyfriend Craig and her children. She was kind of like unkempt, she was ungroomed, she had huge bags under her eyes, and she had no trouble within the boyfriend department, although they didn't have around for very long. She had various children by various different fathers, and her home was like a madhouse according to locals. And despite having a lot of young children in their house, Karen and Craig would often have various friends around at the weekends, sometimes on weeknights too, drinking, playing loud music, and their home seemed to be like the local hangout place in the area. So because it was a tight-knit community, when people found out that she'd been reported missing, they were literally there wanting to find her. And everyone felt sympathy for her. They were like, is this another Mazda McCann case? And then sympathy turned to suspicion. Endless streams of taxpayer money and donations were poured into this search for Shannon. Local volunteers gave up their free time to spend working hours and miles to search for her, to any clues that there might be. Posters were everywhere. And as the hours turned into days, the news, media and general public were glued to this story. And there was just weird things about Karen's behaviour that just didn't really sit right with anyone in the end. They were like lapping up this attention. They were getting freebies, they were getting free pizza, alcohol, clothes, and they were still having parties, by the way, while this disappearance of their daughter was going on, and trips to a local supermarket, and they just literally filled up their shopping cart with whatever essentials they needed. So they took advantage and they went back and forth. And literally, it turned out suspicious. And they let their masks slip. And they didn't act like their daughter was missing. Reporters started knocking on all the neighbourhood doors looking for gossip and stories about Craig and Karen in return for cash. Their so-called friends and family were lapping this up, and then all of the stories came out that Craig had been violent towards Shannon in the past, which he denied, and it wasn't looking good for either of them. And luckily for Karen, and I don't know why or how, and this person does stand behind Karen to this day, her friend named Julie was a major factor in this case because she was the one who got Karen to tell the truth. And Shannon had been through a lot in her young life, and she was part of a large family, but she was isolated and was always being in her room. She was quite a quiet, lonely child who was often bullied at school, and she wanted to go and live with her biological father, Leon. And suspicion towards Karen and Craig continued to grow until out of nowhere a news report flashed saying that Shannon had been found. She'd been alive and well, and people were like, oh, maybe we had a mistake judging Karen too soon, and she was set to be returned to her family, but that wasn't the case at all. Shannon wasn't being returned home, and people were like, what is going on? And Karen didn't appear to be smiling that much, and once the dust had settled and realisation that Shannon's was okay, they were like, where the hell was she all this time? The police were keeping quiet at the beginning, but there was just strange feelings in the air. It was actually reported that she'd been found at a relative's house, which left everyone confused. But Karen had been watching the whole Madeleine McCann case a year earlier and saw all of the money and attention that they were getting. So she came up with a plan that Craig's uncle, a man named Michael Donovan. They take Shannon for a while and they pretend she'd been abducted so they could split any reward money. And at the time of Shannon's disappearance, a reward that was raised between £50,000. And the plan backfired when a neighbour contacted authorities because they heard strange noises coming from this flat, even though he lived alone, and their noises were happening when he was out of the house. It turns out he had rugged her with multiple pills and tied her up with a length of rope where she would only reach the bathroom. He would keep her hidden under a bed, and this poor child went through so much. Karen knew about his history with children. Apparently, in her own family, she was related to 7Ps and didn't seem to have any issues with having these things around her vulnerable children. In the safe hands of authorities, a series of medical tests and psychological tests were done. She'd been given various substances for longer than 24 days. They'd given her various drugs for at least a period of 2 years before her abduction. And why was this little girl had so much done to her? Police turned up at Michael Donovan's flat and found Shannon, and the circumstances she was being held in was disgusting. He wasted no time in spilling to the police about Karen's part in this whole thing. Craig claimed that he knew nothing about the plot, even though it was his uncle whose flat that Shannon was being robbed and held in, and he was outed as a B himself. Karen was brought to the station to confirm that this person was Shannon, and for a mother who's supposed to be beside herself with worry, she didn't seem to care because she knew all along that Shannon was alive. Shannon had her identity changed. She lived with another family, and on the 4th of December 2008, Michael and Karen were found guilty of kidnap and false imprisonment. Both were sentenced to 8 years in prison. Karen has since been released, and Michael died a few years ago from cancer in hospital. And Craig was sentenced in September of 2008 for only 20 weeks for having CA images on his computer, and he was never charged as being part of the kidnap plot. And he has reportedly moved house about 8 times, tried to change his appearance, and people still recognise him. And every time local residents find out that he's there, authorities will move him to another place. And he was back living in Dewsbury, close to a school. Oh, so disgusting. And his location of now is unknown. And Karen still showed no remorse for what was in her mind and what she had done to her daughter. You know, all she kept saying was, well, she's alive now, isn't she? Can't be that bad. And it's just disgusting, her own betrayal of her own mother. And Julie still remains in contact with Karen during her time in prison and beyond. And I really hope that Shannon is out there somewhere being looked after the way she deserves to be looked after and has a happier time with that family.